Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Christian Sasse and I'm hosting the Humans and Wildlife show together already for the 14th time, together with my co-host, Georgia Terry. And she's going to pop in any moment and we'll ask her, Georgia, what have we got today?
Hi, Christian. Thanks for the introduction. So, today we're talking about how to make a good quality backyard habitat for bats and bugs and birds. And you've got the birds, I've got the bats, and our guest for today, Isa Betancourt, has the bugs. So, welcome, Isa.
Hi, so excited to be here with you both today.
Yeah, thank you. So, for those of you who don't know, Isa hosts the weekly Bug Scope. So, she's an entomologist. She studies bugs, and we thought that it would be a great way to round out like this session on how to create good backyard habitat for wildlife. We have a lot of different types of animals covered. For those of you who don't know, part of the inspiration for this episode was that Isa and I used to be roommates. And so until, a few months ago, we lived together and we had a beautiful backyard that had lots of native plants. And it was, for a suburban sized backyard, it was really nice habitat. But then we've since moved and neither of us have backyards that are as good now. And it was a little bit sad also to, hand over that backyard to new owners and not know what was going to happen to it. So that was some of the inspiration for our episode today. Like as Isa and I are rebuilding and trying to figure out how to bring like those best practices to our new homes, we thought that maybe we can help all of you to also create good wildlife habitat. And welcome to everyone in the comments. Thank you for joining, and please let us know what questions you have about how you can create great habitat. So, Isa, do you want to talk a little bit about your transition, your recent geographic transition?
Sure, yeah. So I've been hopping around locations since the main move over back in August/September. And like Georgia said, our house in Ann Arbor, Michigan had so much awesome wildlife in the backyard. I really was taken aback by it and super appreciative of it. I always found something really interesting when I went out there and especially like not just like, oh, this is a cool bug, but it's like, oh my gosh, this is a cool ecological interaction of bugs eating bugs and birds eating bugs and like I saw a jumping spider eating mating beetles. Like it was eating one of the beetles that were mating with another beetle. Like all sorts of weird things and really exciting things were going on. Seemed like a very healthy ecosystem. And it was just
Yeah, every time I went outside, Isa was like, Georgia, come look at this. Like I couldn't come in or leave the house if Isa was outside without having something very exciting in the insect world pointed out to me. So it was fun.
yeah, it was awesome and uh a beautiful place to be. And then I moved to um my other location in Atlanta, Georgia, where I have family. And the difference was huge. One, there is a forested area in the backyard, so that does provide habitat for certain wildlife. Like at nighttime in the morning, I'd hear owls, like barred owls, and that was really cool because I hadn't experienced that at other places I've been. We also got to see a baby copperhead snake, which was at the front door on the front doormat one day. So definitely some other types of surprises from being in this other location, but it was also a bit disheartening because in the front yards in this neighborhood, they were very, very heavily manicured. And when I stepped outside, I often smelled the smell of pesticides. And so, to be clear though, because I learned this from talking with someone who applies pesticides like this, someone who is a neighbor of my family in the Philadelphia area. Sorry, someone who does that for a neighbor in the Philadelphia area. And apparently the conventional pesticides that are used, they don't have a scent to them, which is even more daunting because there's no indication it's completely invisible when it's applied. But then the natural pesticides that have like they have a lot of oils in them and like a lot of essential oils in them, and so you can smell them. And they smell kind of minty to me, but I think not everyone smells them the same way because Ramon like doesn't pick up on it so much. But for me, I like it hits me and I'm like, no, I'm looking around. But yeah, but when I see these perfectly manicured lawns, when I smell the pesticides in the air, it just my heart sinks because I know that those spaces are deserts for the local wildlife. They provide no food. It's like you may as well pave over the lawn. It's basically equivalent to having it heavily covered with pesticides and with turf grass, and the turf grasses are usually not native to the area as well. So
Yeah, so this is a really good segue. I'm going to pull up for a moment the video that we had in the introduction, which is actually of my parents' backyard in Indiana. And so, like, most people don't have a backyard this extensive, obviously. And we certainly have, like, people commenting on that in the comments that, like, oh, I have a balcony to work with. And that's going to be one of the themes that we touch on is, like, what do you do if you have a balcony? What can you do if you have more space? But in this picture, you can see, like, the taller grasses, like, most of their property has, like, what's called, like, this, like, taller native grass that has deeper roots and stuff. But basically the overarching theme, like, when you think about creating wildlife habitat, what do animals need? They need food and water. They would like to have a place where they can raise young on the property, but it's not necessary. Maybe they have some place nearby like that. But they need food and water. And then, like Isa was saying, they need to not have things killing them. You can't have pesticides and stuff like that around. And then they need someplace like a home, even if they're not raising young. Maybe they need somewhere they can sleep at night or hang out at whatever time of day they're sleeping. So most people, when they think of building wildlife habitat, they actually don't think of bugs or bats, what Isa and I specialize on. They oftentimes, I think, first they think about birds. They're like, what kind of birds can I get on my property? Like, the birds are pretty, they sound nice, they're just, easy to see and catch your eye. So Christian, I was wondering if you could start us off with, like, some of the things you can do to bring birds to your property.
Yeah, I mean, the obvious thing is, of course, bird feeders, right? I am no bird specialist, so I have to be really careful. I really love birds on the property, but before I even say that, I have to say one thing that is also important to mention, and that is you bring birds on the properties, and that has a conflict with many cats, right? It's actually not very well known that the main cause of over 1.3 billion birds, or I think the statistics even 2 billion birds worldwide comes from non-owned cats, which is really disturbing, right? I mean, that's the cat's instinct, nothing against the cat, but it's like everything we have to take responsibility for the pets. And many people, I see it in our neighborhood all the time, just let their cats out. I understand why. But the consequences are devastating. I see so much of that. Sorry, I just had to divert a little bit
No,
because
that's perfect. That's another threat, like
yeah,
pesticides. Yeah, there's humans, so
yeah.
it's about, like, reducing the human caused threats, like pesticides, cats,
Mhm.
fake fescue grass that doesn't do anyone any good, and then, yeah, increasing, like, food, water, and yeah.
Yes. And I mean, you probably know more than I do about this, but it's a balance, like everything is, right? There are good sides and bad sides. As soon as you put out food and feeders, you have to take responsibility all year round because birds will change their migratory patterns. They will even go through physical changes. The hummingbirds that we have, and that's something I like to talk about, have gone definitely through changes. We have more hummingbirds than ever. They've never been so far north as Vancouver and so on, even here in our area here in Kelowna. That's all because we have feeders, but you can't just then stop in winter because many of them won't migrate. So either you do it properly and you do it especially through the cold season when it freezes, you have to take responsibility no matter how uncomfortable it is. That's really my main point.
Yeah, and David Howden brings up a point, and we've had people ask about this before, actually, but David Howden says an interesting paper published recently questioned whether bird feeders were unambiguously good. It caused some controversy, and I think there there's several ways where you can go wrong when trying to bring animals to your property. So part of the controversy with bird feeders is that you're creating this space where like lots of diseases can pass between birds. It's this like concentrated feeding area that might not exist otherwise. Regardless of like what food resources you're providing on your property, you need to be a little bit careful about what risks you're exposing the animals to potentially. So one of those risks can be disease transmission, but another is like a bird feeder can attract small birds to an area where they're very vulnerable to hawks, for example, or your cats, you know what I mean? So if you put a bunch of like bird food on the ground, the birds are going to be on the ground where they're more vulnerable to predators. And ultimately there's some degree of like, well, the animals are making their own choices. Like the little birds know about hawks and what kinds of areas are like scary in terms of hawks. But they don't know about things like disease spread, and they don't know about things like, oh, this food is here, and then suddenly it's gone for no reason. Suddenly it stops appearing. It's
I know
not
that
behavior. Yeah, go ahead.
recently there was a disease, maybe it's still happening, affecting songbirds, and so different societies were advising people who have bird feeders out to take them in to try to prevent the spread of the disease. I don't remember the details of it, but I know that was very recent. Yeah. Going
Yeah,
on
so
with that.
sometimes they recommend things like cleaning the feeders and stuff. And I think that's what Christian's talking about when he says like you need to be a responsible bird feeder owner. Like you clean it periodically. You don't put out tons of food and then suddenly have no more food at all. Things like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Christian, any other tips? Like,
Well,
do you ever try to put like a brushes or like dried sticks near the bird feeder? That way, the birds have somewhere close to go and hide in. I've seen people do that
yeah,
before
you
sometimes.
know, Sherry Mattis just brought a very good point. And that's exactly the problem I run into is the rats. I mean, they're so smart. You know, we'd started putting up beautiful bird feeders in the garden. We thought we'd doing them a great favor. And the next thing we had were rats all over. They climb everywhere. They jump. They're so smart. So we had to remove them again. So yeah, I see that point, and we never found a solution to that, by the way. So all I can say, you have to really be aware. Every household is a bit different. I definitely would be very careful with pesticides. As someone just brought that up, you know, the usual.
Uh-oh, Christian froze for a moment.
Oh, I thought it was me. I was like, oh no.
Yeah.
Um, let's
Hopefully
see.
he'll
Yeah,
pop back in a moment.
yeah. I mean, a lot of these things are good not just for wildlife, but also for people and our pets potentially. Like if you have a dog out in the backyard, like you probably don't want a lot of pesticides in your backyard because guess what? Humans and our pets are also animals. Sorry, Christian, you cut out for a minute.
Oh yes, I know. I saw myself freeze. That was it. I saw it. Yeah. It's okay. Yeah. Anyway, I'm sure you answered that on pesticides. We earlier, of course, especially with raptors and pesticides, they're one of the main killers of raptors. We had a lot of experts talking about the subject in the cycle. The same with lead poisoning and so on. Yeah. So
Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing too, is that it can accumulate in like the raptors will eat the rats that got poisoning and it'll go through the trophic level and accumulate in different animals, which is part of the problem as well.
But just to quickly show something about hummingbirds, that's my favorite topic. I would just like to show. I mean, hummingbirds are really easy to take care of. Let me see. Now, Isa was saying before that yeah. Oh no, it is working. There you go. It is actually working. Yeah, that's one of my favorite subjects is of course because hummingbirds are so beautiful. We have the Anis and the Rufus hummingbird. And what I was interested in was their bifurcated tongue because it's incredible. So I filmed this in slow motion. I built a special feeder for it, and of course without disturbing the hummingbirds. That's really important. And that takes a lot of time. I built a special cuvette here. Everything there that you see is very easy to build. It's nothing special. It just takes, like many things do, a lot of patience and a lot of time, to understand how they behave. And I'll just show you quickly how I built this. Let's see if I can put this one up. Oh, sorry, no. Let me just
set up.
George, I just wanted to put that on
forming
full screen.
hummingbirds with a high-speed
Oh, here, let me.
camera. First of all, a very strong light source,
There, it should be full screen now.
a
Why
computer.
isn't it going?
That's the
Strange.
high-speed camera.
Oh, is that the problem? Maybe it's the same problem that.
Oh, there
And
it
that's
is.
the modified setup
Yeah,
of
it's
a hummingbird
it's going a bit too slow. That's my fault.
feeder.
I think
And you
I have
can
the same
see
problem as what
I
you
sort of
said.
put a coop
It's not playing properly.
Oh,
bed
well, we
onto
can
it
still
so
But
that I
kind of
can
see
get them
clips. Yeah.
hovering
Yeah, unfortunately, the sound is coming a bit abruptly. But what
and
you see
also
there, that's the
film
feeder.
how the tongue
So I
will move
put
inside
I built a special type of
the
cuvette that you
cuvette.
can see that I pasted along the side, and I gave the hummingbird the choice whether it wants to sit or whether it wants to fly, because some people would say, you know what, you can't be cruel, they shouldn't fly, but hummingbirds don't behave like human beings, they don't sit down, and eat, they're very different. And what I actually observed is that many prefer just flying stationary, where my finger is pointing, and actually getting the sugar water with their long tongue through that little cuvette. They prefer that rather than sitting down, because their feet are actually not very much, they're very weak and not made very much for that. And so what I did is I put some powerful lights on, but not to blend the hummingbird. And then I have my high-speed camera there looking at it, and I'm actually sitting inside. Unfortunately, the video is not continuing, but I've got this connected to a computer sitting inside, and I can observe, trigger everything without ever disturbing them. And that would, I think we'll put that clip away, George. I think.
Yeah, I
think
tried to turn off the audio video, hopefully to help with the distraction of it, but
there's my computer inside. That's what I was trying to show. That's
I see.
That I'm doing that inside. Yeah. But anyway, so interaction with wildlife can be a lot of fun, but I think you also have to be very mindful when you're a photographer. You shouldn't do that. I mean, you should do it for the love of the birds, and you should understand how they interact, and not try and force them into something uncomfortable or something just to get the photographs. I mean, I've been preaching this a long time. I think Kate, who's also the audience, she knows exactly what I'm talking about. She said that quite a lot. Okay.
Yeah, unfortunately, it kind of comes down to like there's no perfect answer. So like, that people have a lot of good and very specific questions about, people brought up like preventing disease spread at the feeders, and some of it is based on your locality and the problems there. Like you are going to have to do like some research, but we talked about some best practices like cleaning the feeders and stuff. I want to take a quick little timeout real quick to say thank you for the people who gave awards so far. So thank you to David Dunn and David Howden and Frankman. We have two of them gave HAPS Fall Awards, which fall is a great time, I think, to start thinking about what it is that you want to do to your yard in the coming year. And one of the things related to fall, at least for areas of the world that are currently experiencing a fall where we have lots of deciduous trees dropping their leaves, is to not necessarily take away the leaves from your backyard if you want to have good wildlife habitat. Isa, can you tell us about that?
Yeah, totally. This is where I'll bring in the idea of, yes, leaving those leaves there, because it is part of the habitat. It helps protect the ground. It helps add nutrients to the ground. There are a lot of beetles and grubs and the ground is an extremely important location for animals when it comes to surviving winter. For example, tortoise beetles spend the winter in the leaf litter or in the ground as adults, and it's this whole area that, like, I think there's a lot to there definitely is, not I think, there's a lot to discover with it because it's so opaque. It makes it hard to understand or discover exactly what's using the ground, but we know it's a lot of different organisms, and it makes sense if you think about it because in the ground, there's a lot of protection from the frigid desert-like environment that you get from winter. Because the deeper you go in the ground, the more protected from the moisture. You get protected in an area that doesn't get frozen, which helps a lot of insects and things survive into the spring. And so when you
Yeah.
leave the leaves, it helps protect that surface and provide insulation.
I have to click real quick because it's not just bugs that hide out in the leaves. We have this picture of leaf litter with, I don't know if you can see it, but right front and center, there's a tiny little bat
That's so cute.
that's actually nestled in the leaf litter. So some species of bats will spend the winter nestled down underneath the leaves for warmth. And even in areas with snow, then like the snow falls on top of the leaves, but the bats are like buried in the leaves, trying to keep warm in there. So, I mean, maybe you don't want your bats in your yard, but if you do, try to leave some leaves. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
incredible. Wow.
And then there are also some giant silk moth caterpillars, like the Luna moth, for example, which they'll spin their cocoon up in the trees, and then they literally fall to the ground with the leaves, where they are camouflaged with the leaf litter. So if you're cleaning up your leaves and putting them in the bags and sending them away, you might be sending away some of these giant, beautiful silk moth caterpillars, because
Oh no, you're
they're not used to
burying
the
them
leaves being cleaned
alive.
up. Yep. Yeah. It's pretty, they're not built they haven't evolved in an environment or to survive the environment where the habitat's being so disturbed by people sweeping things away and relocating them like that. So there are other caterpillars. There's a lot of diversity in the insect world. There's a million different species and many millions more to be discovered. So there are other butterflies and moths that when they do make their cocoons, they'll reinforce the petiole, the stem of the leaf, to the main stem of the tree so that they don't fall down when the leaves fall. But it varies. There's a lot of variation. So some do that, some do not. Yeah.
Issa, you mentioned that the leaves are like good habitat for the golden tortoise. They're the golden beetle. What is it called again?
For tortoise beetles in general, and specifically
beetles.
my favorite insect, the golden tortoise beetle.
Okay, well, I think the golden tortoise beetle is a great example of what you can do to help wildlife, even if you don't have a backyard, because we were able to attract, I'm going to put up a picture. I should say you were able to attract these beetles to our porch. We had like an elevated porch deck area. And
we purchased a morning glory plant from a store and put it on the porch. And then several weeks later, this isn't what we saw. This is a different photo. You're not going to get this high of a concentration of them unless you take them all together and raise them in a colony, which is what I was doing for this shot. But yeah, they showed up. So this is a good example of if you create the habitat, they're going to find it. The insects are going to find it. They can fly. They're great at dispersing. And habitat is the biggest thing that will affect insects, is what I like to say. For some organisms, like tortoises and things, if you like remove an animal from the environment, that really affects the population. But with entomology, if you remove one insect, it's not going to affect the population. But messing with its habitat is going to affect the populations, or in a good way or a bad way. And in this way, it was a really exciting way because tortoise beetles are awesome and the fastest color-changing arthropod known to man, documented in the scientific literature.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, Issa, one of her Bug Scope episodes, probably multiple episodes actually, focused just on this golden tortoise beetle. So if you want to hear more, you can go there. But the point is just from like one morning, putting one potted morning glory on our deck, and these beetles eat morning glories, we were able to get some coming to our deck. And so that was really cool. So if you have like a balcony or a porch or something like that, morning glories are beautiful vines, and you can get some of these. And these beetles also demonstrate another really important point, which is that the environment is changing seasonally in many areas. And so if you're in an area that's highly seasonal, you have to think not about just like, what is this animal's habitat in summer on the morning glory leaves, but also what is this animal's habitat throughout the year? So if those golden tortoise beetles are going to be on your property, like they don't migrate or travel very far. They're going to be like there. So you need the leaf litter for them to hang out in the winter. And then you need the morning glories for them in the summer. So try to think about like, what the animal is going through over the course of a year.
And that brings us right next to Cherie's question, which is actually very good. She says, So how do all the bugs live when winter and snow lasts for 5 to 6 months? And how do birds, rabbits, and animals feed on insects in the winter when there are 2+ feet feet of snow? That's a good one. Anyone want to tackle that one?
Uh, Georgia, as a mammologist, would you like to start off with it?
Sure. Basically, like animals have a few different ways that they can deal with really cold temperatures, right? They can sort of like pause themselves, like they can go into like hibernation or torpor, or plants do this too, actually. Like that's why a lot of plants lose their leaves. They're just kind of shutting down, cryogenically freezing themselves for the winter,
Yeah.
even
Well,
perhaps.
if you don't mind me adding, like with
Uh-huh.
plants, what happens is they take the nutrients out of their leaves and send them down to their roots to store them for store the nutrients for the winter, for example.
Yeah, so like a lot of times there's like, this is why animals are eating a lot in fall. They're putting on lots of fat. So you can kind of shut down for the winter. You can leave for the winter. You can migrate like many birds do. And Christian, can tell us more about like the importance of migratory food sources and stuff, I'm sure. But yeah, shut down, migrate, or stick around. And if you're going to be sticking around, a really good place to do that is to try to get under the leaf litter, maybe even deeper underground in a burrow or something, because the temperature is much more regulated down there. So you don't have to go very far below ground before you get below the frost line, or at least to an area that's a little bit warmer, like just in the leaves.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know if you have something to add to that, Isa.
Yeah, that's the gist. And yeah, for insects, also some of them will be in like their more larval or aquatic forms in the water, because once again, water has a much more a high heat capacity, so it's slower to change. And so some dragonflies, for example, might still be active as nymphs in bodies of water. And then, as Georgia touched lightly upon, like how birds migrate, some insects, the way that they survive the cold is they leave it. They run away from it. Monarch butterflies right now on the East Coast are escaping winter by flying south. That's how they cope with winter. They fly away and avoid it. Their monarchs are actually more accurately viewed as tropical butterflies that just take advantage of range expansion during the summers, rather than ones that are like really adapted to living in the temperate environments, but they've adapted by running away from the cold, flying away from the cold.
I
And
want
yeah,
to
for
show real quick, since we showed these like beetles, and we already
uh-huh,
talked about like what they do through the seasons. I realized I have enough bat pictures that we can kind of talk about like the bats through the seasons.
great.
So like a lot of species will hang out in trees in the summer. So this is a picture of like a shagbark hickory, which is a really good species of tree if you want to have bats on your property, because well, I'm going to make the picture bigger so you can see it better actually, but like it has this really naturally shaggy bark that always looks like it's peeling off a little bit. And the bats can like crawl up under there, and they basically like to hang out like under the big flakes of bark. And so naturally, most bats live in a lot of bats, at least in northern areas, live like in dead trees. So here's another picture of like a dead tree that's still standing, but it has like bark peeling off, and that's where a lot of the bats like to hang out. And then a replacement for this is bat boxes, which is the picture on the right. But a lot is if you don't want to have dead trees standing around on your property, which a lot of
I
people
encourage
don't.
I encourage dead trees though, because there's so
Yeah.
many things that enjoy them, because you can get mushrooms or fungi, which I know people can look at as like, ah, it's a mushroom, but there are really cool mushrooms out there. There are woodpeckers that will come and eat the bugs that are enjoying the trees that are dead. There's a lot of excitement that can come from a
Oh
dead
yeah,
tree.
like dead trees, if you can get away with leaving them, definitely do, because they're like a really like a really rich biodiversity standpoint. They have tons of animals and species on them. But
And
the thing is, if you
lichens
have
and
a regular size yard and you don't want a tree to fall on your house,
right.
it's reasonable to not want to leave the dead tree standing.
Mhm.
So like
Yes.
species like shagbark hickories are a good option for that. And another alternative for bats, at least, are these bat boxes. And so this is basically like a birdhouse for bats. And so this is like where the bats would hang out in the summer. But then in the winter, like I talked about, the bats will either like they'll migrate farther away, they'll migrate and hang out in the leaf litter, or they might migrate a little bit into a cave. Some people unfortunately have bats that overwinter in their house, but there's only a couple of species that do that. So, make sure your house is sealed, and most bats don't want to go in there anyways. But yeah, just like another good example of like how the habitat changes throughout the year, basically, for depending on the animal.
Yeah. I want to add too that, or kind of highlight what Georgia was saying about that shagbark, and say that, yeah, nooks and crannies, I'll say it that way, are super important for bugs and clearly bats too. And there's a butterfly called the morning cloak, which I just saw my second one ever today, which I was really surprised about, because the first one I saw was in our yard in Ann Arbor in the spring, visiting some of maybe this just the summer, I forget when. But anyway, they're famously known as the first butterfly that's seen in the winter/early spring when the weather starts to get warm. And that's because they overwinter as adults. And they overwinter in nooks and crannies, in logs, I bet you under the shagbark sometimes, in little places like that where they can slip their fully adult formed butterfly bodies. I'm very impressed by it. And I would love to find one at some point.
Isa, I think
overwintering.
we're dancing around something that we actually haven't said specifically, but that's really important, and that's native plants, native
yeah, we
trees,
haven't.
native flowers. Like, those are the things that are creating the habitat that your native wildlife wants, right?
Yes, that's
and
the food,
yeah,
the sustenance.
yeah. And for those of you who aren't aware, this is actually a big conspiracy that me and Christian and Isa have here, because, okay, it starts with you bring the native bugs, you lure them in with the native pollinator flowers. But guess who likes bugs? Many beautiful species of songbirds are insectivorous, meaning that they prefer to eat bugs. And most species of bats are insectivorous, meaning that they eat bugs as well. So we had a question way back. I'm embarrassed, I can't remember if it was David Howden or David Dunn, but one of the Davids asked if there was such a thing as bat feeders, and I was like, yes, kind of. Bring in the native insects, and you will have the food source for the bats and for many beautiful species of birds.
Yeah, plant some native plants that one are native to your area, and two will bring a lot of insect species, and then voila, there's your bird and bat feeder.
That was David Dunn. Yeah,
I see.
I think it's 95% of terrestrial birds rely on bugs as protein to raise their young. And so with someone mentioned earlier, the insect decline, and yes, that is a serious concern because of so much habitat loss and climate change, both of those things. Habitat loss for many different reasons, from pollution, pesticides. Climate change is a cause of habitat loss, development, all sorts of different things contribute to this. It's been called by entomologists death by 1,000 cuts because of so many different contributing factors. I lost my train of thought, but yeah.
No, it's totally fine.
Really
I think Gentleman Ghost was asking earlier about like the insect decline, and several people were like, that's a huge topic. You should get Isa to do its own episode on that. So maybe that's something that, if you're into that kind of thing, definitely follow or subscribe to Isa if you haven't already.
Yeah, it's a really big one.
Yeah, we've talked about, one of the things we talked about was like making a place for them to breed or raise babies, and like the bat boxes that I showed earlier, that's like one thing, right? So like hundreds of bats can fit in that one little bat box. Actually, it's quite amazing how many can squeeze in there. And a lot of species of bats, actually maybe most, they raise their babies together in like big maternity colonies. That way at night when it's cold, they can leave all the babies together, and the babies kind of help keep each other warm. But so bat boxes are really good for raising baby bats. And Christian has some really interesting footage of building a place for birds to breed, though.
Yeah, well, that's so. If I'm going to talk about an eagle now. I don't know if that's what you mean.
Yeah, let's go to eagles.
It's very interesting because it comes back to what Isa was mentioning in the beginning when she was talking about her, her grandmother's house and
Mm.
how much she finds there. And we actually find it's mainly, of course, through David Hancock, the eagle biologist, where I've learned this, that a lot of, a lot of uh, a lot of people come to us and they say, well, we suddenly had an eagle in our backyard. And when you look at the backyard, you'll find it's usually an old backyard with an old Douglas fir, spruce, pine tree, and so on. You'll find these very old trees that are at least 100, 150 feet tall or so. And that's actually the type of habitat that eagles need. And many people say, well, why do we build them nests then? Why should that even be necessary? And you can see that in the picture there, it's David Hancock um, building a nest there. And he does that. He's been doing that for many years. So why do we even bother? Isn't that just like a big bird feed? And the reason is that we actually, the human beings, have destroyed so much from their habitats. They don't have these large trees anymore where they used to go and choose. It's just like you choose your home. You don't just choose any home. You choose the home that you like. And eagles need very sturdy trees. They also need trees with certain structures. You have to think about their wingspan when they come fly in, when they land. They need to be protected from the sun so it doesn't get too hot, right? They need to be sufficiently high up. There shouldn't be too many branches, and there has to be a really big bowl to build. So all this that infers a lot of special trees that are getting less and less possible for eagles to get, and that's why you're finding more and more artificial nests for eagles in cell phone towers and others. And so let's go back to the story now of building them. Building an eagle's nest is actually very difficult. You need a steel structure because you want to have something that lasts for a long time. So first you get a steel structure built or welded, and then you have to get these huge branches. And we're talking about these old branches. I don't know if you've ever seen an eagle fly against, really ramp against a tree. I've watched it. It's amazing. And then you hear a big branch just going whoops, just like that, and the whole branch falling down. And it's if you've never seen it, you'll get quite a fright because they come there with incredible power when they build their nest. And an eagle can carry maximum about probably 4 or 5 pounds. So the branch can't be too heavy. It has to be thick enough so that they can build a good structure with it. And usually these nests can they can weigh somewhere all the way from 200 pounds all the way to 600-700 pounds, and they have a depth about 3 feet and a width about 8 foot. So it's quite a structure, right? And so there are fortunately these backyards, and I don't know about the States, but in Canada, it's not a problem. I know in the States, there's also a person in Texas that I interviewed once who had a wonderful eagle nest in their backyard. And it's again, these old trees, I think in his case, it was an oak tree or so, that is very suitable. And then, of course, it's wonderful because that would be my dream to have an eagle nest in the backyard, but I don't have such a tree, right? But if you do talk to people like David Hancock or so, they can help you, also raise funds so that you can possibly build a nest for them there, and that they can have a long-term home. And then when they are gone, when they migrate, which is somewhere, well, it depends, of course, on the area, but on the Pacific Northwest coast, it's typically beginning of, let's say, beginning of August, mid-August, they start migrating, and they return to the nest very early, like right now, end September, beginning of October, and they're very timely. So there's only a small window that you have to either repair a nest or to install a camera. What David Hancock has found, which is very interesting, is if the eagles will see you interfere with a nest, they will not come back. And that's really severe. It doesn't seem to be like that in all areas, but in our area, it's definitely like that. So the window of time that you have to help wildlife is very small. Yeah, and I thought just
Well, I
thought that.
believe I know you're lamenting your lack of trees in the backyard, but I think when we had David Hancock on the show a couple episodes ago, I think he was talking about how sometimes they even just put up a big like pole with a like platform or something,
That's
right? So
exactly right,
no
Georgia. That's
excuses,
exactly right.
Christian.
That's
No, or some
exactly that.
excuses.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And it's actually a good a very good point. But it has to be a very high pole, right? So yes, you,
Yeah.
you can actually build that. And it's a good idea if you have a backyard and you want an eagle's nest there. But the only thing you have to be careful of, Georgia, is again exactly what David said. You'll have to. The eagles will not be seen you build it. They have. I mean, the things that David has gone through is unbelievable. He's tried to build eagles' nests, and they didn't. They would not go in there. No matter what he tried, even when it was off season. There just has to be one slight hint that there has been some human intervention which they do not like, and they will not get there. So it's a difficult balance. Ospreys are, by the way, wonderful. I
Yeah.
just have to mention that quickly. It's not my backyard, but I've got a wonderful roof camera on the roof. I'll do it another time when they come back, and I'll show you from my roof camera. I'm looking straight into the forest, into an osprey nest. I just had to say that. Okay.
Yeah, the bats can be similarly. I don't think they're quite so picky about the about like if they know that people are messing with their bat box, but they can be very particular about the placement. So I think something a lot of people don't realize. Well, let me put up this picture of the bat box again. Like
Sure.
people often put bat boxes like you can put it on a pole, you can put it on the side of your house, you can put it in on you can attach it to a live tree, but often you don't get as good of results then. I think because the bats just associate like a live tree with like something that's not going to work out very well as a house. But the really key thing for bat box placement, in addition to it being kind of high up, is that you want it to be clear underneath. So I'm gonna show this video real quick that is actually, it's a little bit dark, so it's hard to see, but it's me releasing a bat. And so I'm holding my hand up really high, and then the bat like drops and then flies. So bats need a lot of clearance underneath the bat box because they have to like drop out of something and catch air under their wings in order to start flying. So they can't have like a lot of like little tree branches or anything like that under the bat house. So like for if you're gonna put up a bat box, you want it like 15 feet off the ground at least, clear underneath, and somewhere where it's gonna be in the sunlight probably and get warm inside. Because that's why they like the cavities. They like someplace that builds up a lot of heat during the day, basically, and so that they can just hang out there. But yeah, it's not nearly as intense as making these eagle nests, I have to say. This is like quite the endeavor. Yeah. Isa, do you have any like oh, Christian, you're muted, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Sorry. I just wanted to say, let's jump to the other extreme.
Okay.
That's for Georgia and Isa to answer. It's really the habitat as a balcony. It was mentioned before. That's the other extreme. What kind of habitat can you build on your balcony?
I'll let Isa maybe go first for that, because I think for the balcony, I think if you have a balcony, like birds and bugs are where it's at. I think like bird feeders and having like native plants and wildflowers.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
I was gonna say it seems like we could just bring Frank on for this one because he does have plants on his balcony and makes produce and things like that, and has seen many bees and um, ladybugs come by as well. And so, like, if you do, like, there's totally you can have container plants out there on your balcony and have like butterflies visit. You can have pollination plants out there, or like plants that are rich in nectar and pollen, which will be really loved by your local insect community. They'll come by, visit. It's not necessarily like the best place for many insects to overwinter because of the fact that you don't have the ground, and so you don't have that natural ground temperature control from a soil leaf litter situation. But still, there can be some organisms that will burrow into the soil of the plants in the potted plants that you have there to overwinter. Perhaps some moths will do that, for example. Um, and so there's definitely still potential there, and you can get pretty creative. I know that there's even on Facebook a huge group called Container Plants that's all about people having a garden of plants in containers, and there's a lot of creativity on that group as well. So,
Yeah,
what's your
and
dog's
it
name,
can be,
Kristen?
yeah, it's
We
adorable.
have to know.
That's Jesse, our Jack Russell. Sorry.
Oh, hi, Jesse.
Very pretty.
Oops, now I'm frozen again.
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, I mean, just like it's hard,
Yeah.
it's also hard on plants to stay outside on the balcony over winter, right? Because their roots are above ground, basically. And, you know, we already talked about how being below ground and below the frost line is important for successful overwintering and mediating temperatures.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you're definitely like restricted with what you can do with a balcony, but starting with like having native plants, even if they're just like seasonally ephemeral plants, is a really great starting point, because those native plants again are going to bring like insects and maybe even some birds. Like we also had sunflowers in a container on our porch, and we would have like goldfinches coming to the sunflowers, and we stuck out like sometimes you can put out fruit or something, so like people will put out like orange slices for Baltimore Orioles and things like that. So like birds that eat like insects or fruit or basically anything besides like seeds can have a really hard time finding habitat in suburban urban areas. So things you do that bring like fruit or like nectar or those sort of like less common food sources can be really helpful for putting on your balcony. Yeah.
Yeah. David Howden is bringing up a good point about ideas of how people can identify what's in their garden. So if you do choose to move in this sort of direction and make some changes, it can be really fun to keep track of what you're seeing, and grow the list of what you're seeing and seeing how your changes are changing what you're seeing, basically. And so you can make a list, a bird list. You could just write it down. And we're saying with butterflies or birds, pick a certain taxa or group of organisms. And if you want to get like really into documenting it, you can of course, I encourage you to get field guides, hardcover books to help you sort out what you're looking at. But then there's a lot of great resources online, including one of my favorites, which is iNaturalist, which is basically like Pokemon Go in real life, where you can post a picture of what you see, and then it'll help identify it. And other people in the community of iNaturalists will also help you narrow down what you're seeing. And if you go on there, you can follow me at Bug, and we can see what we can. It helps build community, and I can see what you're posting, you can see what I'm posting. It can be really fun that way.
Yeah. So Molly brings up this really important point about her bat boxes, and it reminds me of something. So she said earlier that she had some bat boxes under her third story eaves, I believe. And I asked her if she had any bats in them in the comments, and she said that all 4 of her bat boxes are full. And it did take a
Wow.
few years for them to be noticed. I think the first bats told their friends because all of a sudden all of them had bats. And Molly, you are exactly right. So animals take a lot of social cues from other animals. So the bats, like it can take years and years for like any bat to find the bat box. But once some of them find it, you're suddenly going to have a lot of bats potentially, because they're creatures of habit. They go back to the places they know. And they're also creatures who are taking like social cues from other animals. And this doesn't just apply to the bats, though. This applies to any kind of like wildlife habitat you're trying to create. So maybe you put out a bird feeder and like no birds notice it for a long time, and then like one bird notices it, and then suddenly you have like 20 birds. So don't be discouraged if you're making these changes to attract wildlife to your balcony or your yard or whatever, and it takes a while. It doesn't mean that you're not going to reap like really good cool results later. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing anything wrong. So be patient and do what you can. And then, yeah, before you know it, you'll be downloading iNaturalist, trying to figure out what all these animals are. You'll be friends with Isa on iNaturalist and seeing everything that she's identifying. And I mean, if you have kids or something, like, or if you're just a person who's interested in seeing what's out there, having animals in your yard is really cool. You like identifying the different species, but there's like all kinds of activities for kids, like making little casts of footprints and stuff like that that you can do if you have like enriched your surrounding environment this way. So
yeah, you can get creative too, and yeah, make a checklist for yourself and see if you can find the same things you found last year this next year. You can make a bingo sheet for your family and scramble it around and see if you can find all the different organisms first. All sorts of things you can do. Yeah. I
yeah.
also want to talk about advocacy as well, because change can happen not just directly with planting in your yard, but also with talking with your local government about the ordinances and the rules and regulations for the yards. Because in a lot of places, what's preventing people from going in this direction are rules about keeping a very highly manicured lawn. And that, because otherwise, sometimes there are fines that can be given if you let a certain part of your lawn grow out, which it can be really good for the plants. And because then the grass goes to seed, and then there's food for animals and all sorts of different things. And there's more hiding, and grasshoppers love it, and all sorts of things like that. But they're definitely, uh, like, for example, I'm on a team in Ann Arbor right now, even though I moved away, but I'm still like really excited about this effort that's being made to create some sort of infrastructure to promote the conversion of portions of lawn into habitat. And a lot of it is just making the resources available and generating and just letting people know, because so many people don't even think about these things. They just grow up with with like a plain monoculture lawn, and that's just what they know. So you just grow up that way. You like hire the pest control, you hire the lawn care people, and they just do the conventional easy thing, get ornamental plants because they're not going to get damaged, and so it's easier to make them look fancy and perfect. But we just need to have a cultural shift and mentality shift to think of a plant with a hole in it as being beautiful because it's supporting life, and it's a part of this whole community that makes our world an enriching place, and the diversity of life, the details that we can encounter and appreciate. So a lot of it is a mentality shift, but then also a bunch of it is once we start to make this uh, raise that awareness to create law changes in the law to support it. So here's an example. In the area that I'm right now, I'm at my grandmother's house in New Jersey, and this is one of the lots in the area. And it used to be a house actually, but then whoever had that house, they just turned it into a lawn. And there were other plants there before, but now it's just plain lawn. And it's a huge like contrast with my grandmother's garden, which is also in the area of where this is, which I'm going to bring that up too. Can I make it bigger? Is that okay?
Yeah, I can let me get myself out of here real quick.
All right, thank
Yeah,
you.
me too.
And Christian too.
Okay, I'll go
And
like
yeah,
this.
we had a comment about someone trying to leave lots of dandelions in their yard. I know that was another thing we tried to do when in our yard in Ann Arbor.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Um, yeah, so here's a picture of my grandmother's garden from this one angle, and it looks kind of chaotic, but there's a lot of different elements here that create nice spots for wildlife and the insects and the birds. And there's the stones and things are creating habitat for a lot of insects that like to be underneath stones and fallen things on the ground, like ground beetles, crabids. And then there's a lot of different plants and also a lot of perches, which the dragonflies love. And because we're in New Jersey along the coast, this is an area that a lot of butterflies and dragonflies and some other insects too, and birds are passing through to migrate. This is right on the way to Cape May, which is like the very tip of New Jersey. So a lot of animals are funneled down and come to this sort of bottleneck point in New Jersey before they cross the bay into Delaware on their way down south. And so I just love this garden here because it's literally an oasis and a place where the monarchs fuel up on their way down south to Mexico. I have a picture of one here that I'll bring up as well. So there we get lots of monarch butterflies. I counted like 8 of them out. I'm here today and I counted like 8 of them in the garden. And then like there's buckeye butterflies. I saw the morning cloak out there. I saw a bunch of um, painted ladies out there as well, lots of skippers and a bunch of different dragonflies. And I also was witnessing just half an hour before this broadcast some sort of warbler. They're hard to identify sometimes, but either a yellow-throated warbler or a pine warbler, not sure. That was sitting on one of the plants out there that had flowers, and it was foraging. I was watching it as it hopped up and tried to snatch at different bugs that were visiting the flowers, and it was really cool to see that. And um, yeah, it's just like I'm very grateful for this space. And I just love seeing all the wildlife that comes and visits it. And here's some more pictures of things that I've seen. Like um, here are some stilt bugs that are mating. So to explain the picture a little bit, the one insect that's on the left side and holding on to the plant is the female, and then the other two are males that are trying to mate with her. And there are like a lot of insects like this on this one plant, and it was really cool to see them all hanging out there in golden hour when the sun was setting. And then here's another insect, which we're on the very edge of its natural range. This is the Carolina mantis, which I also found in the garden. And you're not gonna find these like in in this habitat. Like it's complete contrast. It's completely like the opposite. So um yeah, I can bring everyone back on now. But that's
Yeah,
my
I
little
want to
story and
comment
aside.
too. Like we've been talking a lot about like the types of habitat that you have in like I guess basically in temperate North America, I would say. But what you do that's like most going to help the habitat in your area, or that's most going to help wildlife in your area, like depends on the habitat. So I just want to share my screen real quick because, for example, like in the Midwest, we have a lot of water, and so it's a good idea to provide water for animals, but you don't necessarily, it's not necessarily going to be a limiting factor. But if you live in the desert, can you see my screen now?
No.
No? Okay. It's always kind of weird. I feel like I have to try like a couple times. um Gosh.
Georgia, I think we saw the screen, but you just have to share it on the main screen. That's all. We did see it.
Oh, you did see it. I see.
I
Okay,
mean, we saw it,
I gotcha.
Isa, but not everyone else. So.
Can
Um
you click it onto the main screen then, or when
oh,
I
it's not
Yes,
there
share it again?
anymore.
but it's
There's
not
Yeah,
there
no
I'll
anymore.
present again.
Okay, now
There.
it's coming back up.
Okay.
There. Okay.
The broadcast
So
studio.
yeah, if you live like in desert area or someplace where water is like more limiting, if you add water, you're gonna get so many different animals coming to visit.
Mm.
And again, this is like, since it's not necessarily a natural thing, there's a snake. Ooh, since it's not necessarily like a natural thing for the desert, you have to be like a little bit conscientious. You know, you don't want to do like with the birds and the bird feeder where you're creating like a big disease a disease
Hub.
spot or something. Like you would want to keep the water clean and not put out like tons of water or anything like that. But because it is a limiting resource and because humans take up a lot of water, um, it can be a really helpful thing to do to counteract some of the negative effects humans have on the environment, to like provide water in places like this.
Oh,
So yeah, and oh my gosh, these birds are so cute. I actually didn't
yeah.
even watch this video first. I just
That's an awesome video.
yeah.
And I want to add too that even like a dish of water can do a lot for
Mhm.
animals. And you'll even get insects visiting as well. Just
Right.
make sure if it's a dish that you replace it every so often so you're not growing mosquitoes.
Yeah, clean it. And so another thing, and this actually applies to like birds and bugs and mammals, is the type of water you provide is really important. Even in an area like the Midwestern United States where we have tons of water, some animals are really picky and want running water. And some animals are like afraid of like running water or fountains, and they want really still water. Other animals are like, ew, still water, it's going to be gross, I want running water. So if you're like really dedicated to providing a backyard habitat, you're going to have some running water and some still water. If you have like, I know that like a lot of species of birds are like kind of particular in which one they want. And like if you have like pet cats, for example, and like your cat really wants to drink out of the faucet, and you're like, oh, you stupid cat, like you'd never survive in the wild. Why are you so picky about wanting faucet water? Well, wild animals are actually not that different. They, for good reasons, they have preferences for like running water or still water or whatever. So yeah, you can have like a fountain bird bath and just a still bird bath, for example.
Yeah.
And someone commented on mosquito dunks. Do you want to
That's a good
say something
option.
on
It's
this?
it's that some pesticides are not very well targeted. Many of what's being sprayed, for example, in yards, pesticides are like really disproportionately affect the non-mosquito insects. Like spraying is just not an effective way to control for mosquitoes at all because of the way that they have their life cycle. But mosquito dunks are very targeted towards mosquitoes and really only affect a small taxa. It's like mosquitoes and like one related group too. So that's do recommend that for containers if you have a container like that you can't really get rid of in your yard.
Yeah, like especially I'm assuming like if it's easy to dump the water and just like rinse it out and replace it, that's best. But it sounds like mosquito dunks are a good option.
Yeah.
Thank you for the teamwork award, Peter. We appreciate it. Cherie says, I would put a bowl of water out on my balcony and had a couple of baby birds come every day and a weasel come drink from the bowl every day. Wow, that's
Awesome.
cool. Where are you at, Cherie? I want to know. I want to know where I can see weasels if I put out water. I mean, we have weasels here, but I feel like they're not that enticed by water. And Stanley Skirvin says he was thinking of installing a bird bath. Would the birds that stay in the water use it? If I heated it, would it endanger their possibly freezing after using? Ooh, that's Christian shaking his head.
No, I would just say no. From the experience, of course, it depends on how much you heat it. If you just make
You
it
would say no, it's
lukewarm,
not going to put them in danger.
no, because a lot of water is shallow and that heats up in the sun very quickly, right? So they're used to very different temperatures. So that I don't see any problem there, really. No.
Yeah, I've heard of like bigger wading birds like getting frozen in the water. Like sometimes you'll see a crane or something with only one leg. But I think like if you have the heated bird bath, which some people do in colder climates, then they're not gonna like get out and freeze. I think they have like oils on their feathers and like different feather layers and stuff like that to help them.
There's a comment earlier from Heather Lewis saying, what is your take on private backyard swimming pools and impact on the environment? And while I can't comment on that extensively, I do want to encourage that for people who have a swimming pool in their backyard or even pond or what if it's a man-made pond, to have some sort of ladder for wildlife to climb out. That will help eliminate some of the wildlife issues when wildlife gets stuck in there.
Actually, yeah, I mean, this goes not just for pools, but for anything you have that could trap wildlife, right? So now we're getting
a bowl of water
away
even
from like food and shelter and into like not hurting animals. Like, keep your cats inside, put out little ladders in your pools or fountains. That way animals can crawl out. I have found on our property, I've found snakes dead that got stuck in like garbage barrels or something, or just like stuck in weird places in the barn. We have like
window
netting
wells too.
Yeah, window wells are a big one.
Put a ladder there, put a stick there.
I found a possum skeleton in one of our window wells. So like the windows of the basement, basically, where there's like a depression in the ground. A possum had, I guess, fallen in one of those and then hadn't been able to get out.
So
like anything,
that can be
yeah,
solved, sorry, yeah, with like a stick or something else that gives a way for the animals to get out themselves. Yeah.
yeah, water wells, like these window wells. We had also like this netting in the barn that we used to cover the trees and keep birds out. But like because the netting was all just like scrunched up and put in a barrel, a
Mm.
snake had actually gotten like itself twisted in there and
Oh.
stuck and died. I actually found 2 snakes dead that way. Sorry, my parents joke, they're like, whenever Georgia comes here, she finds something dead. Like you just like attracted straight to death. But it's because I have this like empathetic animal perspective, and I'm
Of
like,
course.
whoa, look at all that netting in the barrel. Like, did something get stuck
Yeah.
in there? Or like, whoa, look at the window. And I'm like, yep, something's dead in there.
You
And
know
they're
what to
just
look
like,
for. Yeah.
oh, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, look out for those hazards because these animals, like we as humans have put out so many obstacles for animals that they
Mm.
haven't had to deal with in their evolutionary trajectory. So, yeah.
yeah. It's not as intuitive as you might think. So to keep staying out of those types of like dangerous areas. So,
Hmm. I
um,
I want to also encourage people to, if you are actively engaged in making your property or even like a local, like a public, not public, but like maybe like your church or community centers, or local parks area. If you're looking to make it more friendly to wildlife and native animals, then I encourage you to put a sign acknowledging your efforts so that people know. Because part of it is doing it, and another when you're doing that, if you share your journey and your process, then that can help encourage others to do it and think about it too. Because, like I said before, a lot of people, I dare I say most people, because I feel like it might be that way sometimes, don't even think about these things. And so, starting the conversation and having an opportunity for that conversation is huge. And so, one way to do that is see if your area has a way to register, and there might be a sign you can buy, like the National Wildlife Federation, for example. I'll put it in the comments.
mhm.
They have a certification program, and to tell the truth, like at when George and I were living together in Ann Arbor, like I'd always like been like, oh, I need to get that, I need to get that, but I didn't get it until I was like, oh my gosh, like our two neighbors have it. Like I really need to get it so I can add to the chain of people in our neighborhood who have it. So there we go, like a social. I was
Social pressure
encouraged.
is real. Yeah.
Yeah,
Or
I was
like
encouraged by other
encouragement.
people in my
Yeah.
neighborhood to add it. It helped like pull the trigger to get it done.
Right. Yeah, and like, it like you said, it could be a segue to starting conversations, but even just seeing it, like someone might be confused, like, why does this person have all this tall grass in their yard? And then if you have a sign like explaining it, or linking the idea of like, oh, natural habitat, tall, crazy grass, like this person isn't just like super lazy or something. Like
Yeah.
that sign is doing a lot of work for you when you're not around.
You're
Um,
showing the
mhm.
value and the important stuff that may not have otherwise been considered. And also it helps counteract commercial signs that advertise for mosquito services that are on the other side of it. So it's super important to put up these signs.
Yeah, the sign is doing a lot of work for you. And that's a really good point you made. It's also like balancing out all of this other um, sort of like consumerist messaging that we're getting. Oh, Christian is
And
back.
feel
Well,
free to make your own sign if you want to too, like
yeah.
pollinator friendly or pesticide
Hmm.
free, or we
Yeah,
love
or
our
like
wildlife and plant
yeah,
for it.
one I can think of is like we talked about keeping your cat, or we talked about how problematic cats can be, and there's some solutions for owned cats, like instead of just keeping them inside all the time. Like people have different values, maybe they don't want to do that, or the cat's just not used to that, but they have like these really bright colored cat collars you can get,
Mm,
which birds have a very good sense of vision. And so if you put something like really bright and big on your cat, um, then that's gonna be a lot better for the birds to see that the cat is
Mm.
around. And I can
yeah.
imagine like making a sign. I've never seen someone, but I can imagine like someone making a sign that's like, bird deterrent proof, or like bird deterrent cat or something like that. Or I guess like the cat's collar in itself is kind of its own sign. You're like, what's up with that? But yeah, we encourage you to seek out solutions and creative ways to promote and protect the wildlife and habitats in your yard. And I hope that people will get in touch with us about whether or not this episode inspired you to like do something, to make some change, like to buy a sign, to order some seeds for next year, buy a bat house, a bird house, a little bumblebee hotel. We didn't get to talk about those, but there's all kinds of cool things you can do. So I would just ask everyone here to just take like one little step and tell us about it, because we're super excited to hear.
That's a great idea. Yeah.
I also want to share a couple of resources if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
So
And
the
we can put them
Audubon
in the chat
Society,
too.
okay, the Audubon Society and the National Wildlife Federation both have databases available online where you can go there and see what's native in your area. You just put in, sorry, this is for North America specifically, but you go into their website, type in your zip code, and then they tell you what's native for your area. And they also sometimes link it with what birds are helped by it. And for the National Wildlife Federation, they're really focused on what caterpillars and what moths and butterflies eat the plants as well. And one of the biggest things, at least on the East Coast, is oak, which supports like 400 species of different moths and butterflies. That's amazing. That's one native plant versus a ginkgo tree, which supports like nothing here in the USA. So that's one of the example of the differences of how much of a difference you can make with the wildlife, depending on what you choose to support and to keep and to plant in your yard or space.
Yeah, I think that's really good. Thank you, Isa, for bringing our attention to that. I am just going to, well, I guess should we all say something that we want to do or that we want to, or stuff that we want to try to take, or should we challenge each other to take a step?
Yeah, give us a little bit of time, Georgia. I think I also have a lot to digest. I think this was great. I learned so much, really, so much. I have to have a little bit of time to think, and but I will promise to come back with something. Okay.
Sure, I can share.
Okay.
Well, one, I've encouraged my grandmother to get one of the signs from the National Wildlife Federation, and that has happened, which I'm very excited about. And same with my parents, especially because in the neighborhood in the Philadelphia area, there's so many mosquito signs, and it just breaks my heart. So I'm like, we must rise against it and put our signage up. It's just more difficult when the companies are motivated by profit, and these signs are not motivated by profit. It's extra. We're going out of our way to do these things. So I do recognize that, and that's why it's so important. But then also, right now I'm actively, like I said, working with community members in Ann Arbor to put together resources to help encourage this sort of movement in the Ann Arbor area. And I'm super excited to be involved. And once we get the website up, because we're making a website, we'll have to come back and share the website, because I think it could be inspiring.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think that I'm going to get a cat collar for my cat, and I'm going to challenge Isa to get a cat collar for their cat too, which I know that Isa, you want one, but your husband is against it, correct? Because he thinks, I tried to convince him of this and he was like, oh, it's going to make Mika look too silly. But I think Mika would look awesome in a little bird-proof cat collar. So I'll poke him about it. I'll get a cat collar for myself, and I'll work on Ruman.
Yeah.
I think it's a great idea. I can only applaud that, because, you know, I have to come back to the beginning of, I interviewed, I forgot what his name was, Professor Peter Murrah, I think was his name. He wrote a whole book on the, on the devastating loss of birds through cats. And there's a scientific article that was published in 2013. I only became aware of him when I saw his talk, I listened to his talk at an ornithology conference. And my goodness, Georgia, since then, my eyes are completely different. So it's like, I wake up every day with new things, just like what I've learned today from both of you, which is incredible. But the cat thing really disturbs me. It really does.
Yeah. I feel like I have to, acknowledge that my cat is 15 years old, and we've grandmothered her because she's lived her whole life this way. But now, knowing what I know, I can never have a cat that goes outdoors again unless I have a leash or controlled area where it's able to go.
Yeah. No, we have similarly belligerent cats. My cat has just done nothing but she was always, I guess, like kind of semi-feral, and she's done nothing but revert farther and further to her sort of. She doesn't really tolerate being inside very much at all. But so there we go, cat collar. Well, that's it, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope to have you on next week, where Christian and I will be talking about another exciting topic in humans and wildlife. With that, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you.